Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Graham Abbey, an actor you might have seen in TV shows like The Border, Degrassi: The Next Generation, and most recently Under the Banner of Heaven, or in movies like Defendor, Take This Waltz, and the upcoming Stay the Night. You may also have noticed him on stage at the Stratford Festival at some point over the last 40 years. He's also the artistic director of Prince Edward County's Festival Players, and with their summer season currently underway, it felt like a good time to have him on the show. Graham picked Chariots of Fire, Hugh Hudson's Oscar-winning 1981 drama about two English runners, Eric Liddell, who was a devout Christian, and Harold Abrahams, who was Jewish, who forge a friendship despite their differences and the prejudices of their era as they train for the 1924 Olympics. That's the spine of the story, which builds towards a triumphant climax while also addressing less upbeat matters like Britain's recovery after World War I, deep-rooted problems of classism and anti-Semitism within the UK, and a few other things besides. If your experience of it is only the trailer and maybe Vangelis' score, you might be surprised to hear it's a little more complex than just some guys running. But it is. And we're going to run alongside it for a bit. This is Someone Else's Movie.
You know, I've seen a lot of films in my life, but I was trying to think, well, what had an effect on me? So yes, the two options I gave were Chariots of Fire and E.T., which is probably from a period in my life. I think, Chariots of Fire spoke to, I always played sports my whole life. So being a sporting film, it spoke to me at a young age, I think. I'm fascinated by the Olympics, specifically sort of old Olympics. I've made a habit, at least when I was traveling in younger days, to go to former Olympic sites. I find them fascinating, So I think that combo brought me into it. I'm of Scottish and Irish background, so Eric Liddell's Scottish side in that film also spoke to me. And I just, I'm not overly religious, but I just found it really inspiring. And the sermons and the rain and all of that stuff, it just really moved me at an age that, so I used to play athletics I played volleyball quite competitively, varsity and in the junior worlds. And so I took a recording of Eric Liddell's speech for inspiration, and I often play it before some of my games or something. So I was a strange young man. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, I'm constantly hearing actors explain, that they listen to music for roles. They make mixtapes to figure out how to get into character. Sorry, playlists now. But inspirational speeches is something that comes up every now and then. And it's never actually the same one. It's always something else. And this being sort of a synthesis of film and reality, like it is based on a true story, that's kind of like a pure inspiration thing. It's really fascinating.
I think so. And, it's funny because I scanned Wikipedia to, refamiliarize myself with the film and found all sorts of kernels I didn't know. But the actor who played Eric Liddell came from the theater.
In Charleston?
They found him in the Scottish, or you said Royal Shakespeare Company or something, doing a play. And so it's probably that too, is there's a theatricality to the way he spoke that stuff, which spoke to me as a theater rat, I think. And a Shakespeare buff is my thing. So it's not for naught, I guess, that I was moved by the rhythms of that speech, because it is very Shakespearean, for a film.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a strange animal as a movie too. I revisited it for this and hadn't seen it since, I'm going to guess, 1982.
Sure. Yeah.
I saw it at the Willow Theater on a double bill with The Outsiders, and it made no sense.
And is that when it came out? Was it 82?
1981.
81, okay. Yeah, but at the same time, there was the time when I was doing my first seasons as a 10-year-old kid on the Stratford stage. So it probably is aligned with that for me memory-wise, because at the same time that I was sitting on a stage with some of the greats in Stratford history, listening to them do Shakespeare, I saw that film. So it probably has a link that way too.
Yeah. And so how old would you have been?
I would have been 10. I was born in 71. So I would have been, 10 when it came out. Isn't that?
And 10 when you started at Stratford.
Yeah, and 10 when I started at Stratford. I was a young I played Fairy Number 2 in The Merry Wives of Windsor in 81, and then I played a singing page in As You Like It in 82. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And I was only a little bit older. I would have been 13 in 82 when I saw it.
Okay. There you go.
And all I knew at the time was that it was the film that beat Raiders of the Lost Ark for Best Picture at the Oscars, which is an incredibly childish way to perceive it. I acknowledge.
Well, no, there you go. I that was around that time too. But yeah, and I've watched it a gajillion times, and really periodically Google some of those sermon scenes. I mean, the great scene when he spills on the track and gets back up. I mean, you can't, it's just fantastic. It still gives me chills talking about it. I don't know why. And I was never a runner. I played sports, but I wasn't a runner. But yeah, I just love it.
But you're on board by that point when it happens. You're invested so fully that, of course, if you're into sports, you're going to feel it even more profoundly.
Sure. Yeah.
I was really struck by a couple of things this time through, which is that it is so not a sports movie, even though it has the structure of one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it is so calmly, quietly queer in a way that 40 years ago, I don't think.
Yes. Well, I haven't rewatched it, but it's interesting you say that. Yeah. To talk more about it, because I can't remember that side of it. But
well, it's just there. It just floats underneath the attraction, the support, the sense that everybody sort of feels fluid. And it did not occur. I mean, I was too young to understand, I think, that stuff, let alone interpreted through film when I first saw the movie. But there's all the stuff about anti-Semitism, but it also feels to me that it's playing into this nest of young men who are bonding in different ways. And there are just these little moments, little, I don't know if it's friendly support or attraction. I could not tell how the actors were playing it, which I found really fascinating.
I think you're very right. I mean, fluid's a good word because there's a great love and attraction amongst those men, and they share a bond in their love of that. But yes, it's interesting that that's there, and of course the anti-Semitism too. And it when I reread that, I'm like, oh yes, of course. But when I was 10 years old, I wasn't hitting that either. So it would be an interesting one to revisit. So does it hold up in your mind? Does it hold up as a?
I'm curious. I don't know. I think it does. I think I might actually like it more now.
Sure.
In my 50s, as someone who can understand the context of the time that it was made, as well as the time it's taking place in, because it's just after World War I, and it's about England recovering from this gutting of its young men, of this inconceivable law. I mean, we really don't understand now, 100 years later, just how devastating that was, and how fresh it would have been in the psyche of Hugh Hudson making it in 1980.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, even if he wasn't old enough to remember it, his parents would have been telling him stories, the same way that his generation would have grown up after World War II, and they remember rationing and the Blitz and everything else, even if they didn't live in London. That's just burned into the national consciousness of the English.
Sure.
And what I got this time is the sense of how badly needed the triumph is, how all these young men who have either missed out on the war or seen things and refused to discuss them are trying, like they're literally trying to outrun their collective trauma and get ahead of it. And that maybe that's why the queerness sort of feels like it's drifting in there too. There's this whole strange thing about a devout man and an observant Jewish man trying to ignore both of them. Sorry, I don't know how to phrase this properly. Ignore both of their backgrounds in order to form a team, to form a unit.
Sure.
And it's about overcoming your own internal prejudice, which could also be read as internalized homophobia, right? It's a pure love between men that also feels like it could be romantic as well as spiritual.
Yeah, having to harbor or bury parts of yourself in order to do or be something. I also saw in in my Wikipedia search, so I'll admit that, so I don't sound super intelligent here. But
No, go for
but the producer who was looking for a story in a line with Man for All Seasons, which I find interesting. So in doing the Wikipedia, I was like, there's so many links to theater in this film. That's what was odd to me. And of course, his drive, I guess, according to interviews with Man for All Seasons, is he wanted to find a story about someone who had a crisis of conscience, like we see in Man for All Seasons. So that speaks a little bit to what you're talking about too, about people questioning, something they've always known, or trying to bury that aside. How does that negotiate? And of course, it's a massive story about class as well, which the British are fascinated with.
Sure.
And so that ties in there too. And I'm forgetting too that I think the Americans are quite vilified in it, aren't they? They're sort of the anonymous enemy, I think.
Yeah, they're pretty ugly. They're not even ugly. They're just classless, right?
Sure,
they're crass interlopers who don't belong.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's the little Canadian side of me too that reveled in that. But and add in. I've always been a real. When I was young, was a nut for classical music. I loved it, and so the soundtrack in that is gorgeous too, and that adds to it all. And I think he recently passed away, didn't he? The composer,
Vangelis, yeah. And it is sort of anti-classical, right? I mean, it's a period film that's scored with synthesizers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, which is his classic sound, but yeah,
and no one disagreed with it. I couldn't find a single instance of someone saying that it's anachronistic or it's wrong. And now we're so alert to composition that I found it really kind of delightful that everyone just assumes, well, it's another time and I guess this music is appropriate to it. But it is, like, it's so indelible.
Yeah. Well, it's got it's got that beautiful scene running on the beach at St. Andrews. It's got that sort of galloping rhythm, I mean, that synthesizer sort of hits the heartbeat of an athlete, of the feet on the sand and stuff. It's it's gorgeous music.
Yeah.
Did he win for soundtrack that year? It won a whole bunch of Academy Awards, right? Okay.
I think it won. I should double check this right now. I was going to say I think it won 6.
I thought it was 7, but there's my Wikipedia.
Yeah, it was nominated for 7.
Okay.
And it won only 4. Picture, original screenplay, costume design, and film editing.
Okay.
I remember. 5. Sorry, 5 and score.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more theater link for me is that I totally didn't know is John Gielgud's in it as well.
Yes, of course.
He's a great Shakespearean actor. So it's very weird that at that time in my life that movie spoke to me. I guess very odd.
Yeah, it's the joke of John Gielgud is like, I think it was immediately after making Caligula, he wanted something, noble. And
well, one of my mentors at Stratford was Brian Bedford, and sure. Brian was directed several times by Gielgud. So I have a 1 degree of separation to John, and Bedford would always use the Gielgud's, pass down a lot of his approaches to Shakespeare's text and something that he learned. So it's sort of a neat connection. Yeah.
I always enjoyed seeing him. He was always, it's one of the, we're about the same age, so you'd have had the same experience. Like every time you see him, he was always old. He was never a young man in my mind.
That's right. Yeah.
And to see him in the roles that he started to take towards the end of his career, things like, Arthur, and just to play instead of to be stentorian and important.
But I think I have this story right. I think it was Gielgud who, either through Bedford or somebody else, who he phoned him in his. How old was John when he died? He was well into his 90s, wasn't he?
93, 94, I think.
Yeah. So I think around the age of 90, somebody phoned him and asked how he's doing. He said, "Well, I'm firing my agent because I'm not getting enough parts or something at 90." So he, consummate professional, but. But I, of course, forgot he was in that too, as a professor at Cambridge or something.
Yeah. Oh, the cast is loaded. I mean, you've got Lindsay Anderson, the filmmaker, who also just happens to be here, and Ian Holm, who's the
Ian
only
Holm,
actor nominated for an Oscar in the
Was
cast.
he
But
really?
yeah,
Okay.
I had completely forgotten he was in it,
Mm-hmm.
and again, just delighted to see him.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
he's
Now, Ian Holm plays the coach
the
of.
coach, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And again, it's an interesting take on it, right? Like it's not, I guess the defining thing about Chariots of Fire is that it is not an American sports movie right at a point in time when there were dozens of them being taken very, very seriously. I mean, there was Rocky, obviously, but The Bad News Bears was a huge hit. Like all these American films about
Sure. Yeah.
The Longest Yard, the 60s were okay, but then the 70s, they just exploded.
Exploded. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here is this little film about the most basic sports I mean, it's really there's no equipment, right? There's nothing but the man running versus the other men running.
But it's interesting you say it's not a sport movie because I think you're right. I mean, to me, the attraction to it was the relationships and the depth of the characters. I think, and as you say, the great love. I mean, the relationship between Abrams and Ian Holmes' character, the coach, is extraordinary. So I think I fell in love with those stories, and it happened to be centered around sports. But there's the great when they're in the locker rooms putting the cleats on and just in sort of silence and prepping for the run. It's great. And of course, I forgot about. Well, I got to rewatch it now, but. The great American runner hands him a note before he runs that 400 race, right? And I think it's a biblical quote or something. But
do we? Yeah. I can't remember. I know that a lot of the notes that are seen in the film are real. They're the actual text of the letters that people wrote to their parents and all. But that scene feels like it would also have to be factually accurate, like someone sourced that moment. It doesn't feel like anything in the film is taking too much of a liberty, which I think is one of the reasons people dismissed it at the time as a kind of a dry film, because it's so much more, as you say, about the relationships than it is about the Olympics.
Yeah, I think this is pre social media days, but so what he did, I think the screenwriter is he took an ad out in a newspaper or something and asked for anyone to submit stories they had from that 1924 Olympics. And
I didn't know that.
So a lot of these stories came from people saying, well, yeah, my grandfather was so-and-so, and that's where it kind of came from. But I find it funny editing an ad in a newspaper, I guess, instead of doing a social media blast. But.
Yeah. And this is Colin Whelan, the actor the screenwriter who was himself an actor. He was in Kes, which I didn't know until this viewing, and I recognized him this time.
Yeah, and I'm not listen. You're a film buff, and I certainly am not. But I think the films, and if I rewatch this, be curious to see, because years ago I tried to go through some of the great films, and I watched In the Heat of the Night. I remember, and I was amazed. So I'm a stage actor mostly, but I do film, and quite often when we as stage actors go to do film, the note we get is speed it up. Because we take moments on stage that, especially TV, I did 3 years on a cop show, and you got no time. It's just, hands up, get out of the car, let's go. There's no time for moments. But I was amazed when I watched In the Heat of the Night how slow and the moments were. There was space between the lines. And I don't know if that's the same for Chariots of Fire, but I would call that a very theatrical approach to filmmaking, and we don't see it much anymore because we edit it so fast now, at least in my humble opinion, that you can't sit in moments, and an example, I'm rambling on now, but we film the Shakespeares at Stratford every year, and what happens is they've got to edit them, and whenever I watch them I get frustrated because an editor goes in and will edit a theatrical pause or moment of mine that worked very well in the theater, whether to get a laugh but it's gone in the film. And so so it's they're two different mediums, I guess, but I appreciate the slower pace of some of those older films.
I did not know they did. So they tighten up theatrical performances.
They do, particularly, they edit them, and so when they go to the Cineplex, they're edited, and when they go, CBC will often air them, and they're really edited, like they're cut down to get it inside a 2 hour and 40 minute play inside 2 hours or something for CBC. So they really edit down. But yeah, you lose those moments. So what happens in a movie theater for whoever's watching it is you don't get the laugh that you got in the theater because somebody has just by a nanosecond shortened that moment,
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to tell you about the new Shiny Things newsletter, my weekly dispatch about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming thing. This week, I wrote about Amazon's fun new time travel show, Paper Girls, Kino Lorber's 4K release of Eastern Promises, and the bizarre experience of stumbling across a terrible, terrible movie I had totally forgotten seeing twice as a kid. Subscribe for the price of a latte at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Twitter account. It's me. I'm writing about movies again. Come check it out.
It's the power of the editor in film. I mean, I think a great actor once said to me that they consider themselves they present the palette of paint, and then the director and the editor paint with it, basically is what the actor's doing. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's the three, right? The film is written, then it's shot, then it's cut.
Yeah.
But stage is one act shorter. I mean, it's just from the writing to the performance, and that's it. That's you take it home with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So the actors have, I guess, more power to either make it better or ruin it, whichever way you go, I guess.
I've seen both.
Yeah, that's true.
And I've seen films screwed up in the editing. So, it can't be helped. Everything is vulnerable if you don't have it exactly right.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Chariots of Fire feels theatrical. It felt naturalistic to me. It felt observational in a drawing room drama sort of way, but still theatrical because the rhythm of the cutting is such. Like Terry Rawlings is the editor, and he's just a stone professional. This guy, I'm going to pull up his credits so I actually get it right, but I know I can think of dozens of films that he cut. He cut Alien. He,
right.
He knows what to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
One of his last movies was The Core, which I love. This totally silly disaster movie with Aaron Eckhart and Hilary Swank and Stanley Tucci.
What movie? Which one?
The Core. It's almost 20 years old now. The Earth's core stops spinning and chaos reigns, and so a team of idiots have to take a drilling machine into the center of the Earth to detonate a nuclear weapon and restart it. It's fine. It's all fine. But it knows exactly what it's doing. It's a very, very silly film. And the director is Johnny Meal, who was an English filmmaker who sort of a journeyman, worked with, Oscar Bate and also big, silly studio pictures. Kind of like Hugh Hudson did, I suppose. I mean, he produced and ultimately took some directorial credit for Greystoke, which was a Robert Towne project, and Revolution, this gargantuan project. I mean, it's weird. The Hugh Hudson story is fascinating because he didn't get the credit he deserved for Chariots of Fire because David Putnam was such an active proponent of the film. He was the one who wrote about it. He was the one who did the Oscar campaign. He brought Hudson along, but there was always the implication that Hudson was just the guy who came in and called action, which is terribly unfair because this film is directed. I mean, someone has worked with the actors. Someone has worked in post. Yeah, it has a vision. And then he never got to do anything else like it because he was immediately vaulted into these big prestige projects from Warner Brothers after the movie won the Oscar. So he ended up helming this super serious revisionist Tarzan film, which everyone remembers as a colossal disaster. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It was just a misbegotten project from the beginning. Andie MacDowell was in it it was her first film, and she was famously dubbed by Glenn Close because they decided her voice was too Southern for the English character she was playing.
Ringing a bell,
Yeah, Christophe Lambert was the lead, and he's interesting, but the whole idea of going back to Edgar Rice Burroughs and making a serious Tarzan movie from the man who brought you Chariots of Fire, it all just sort of stacks up into a disaster.
Yeah. And David Putnam, the producer, what were his credits prior to this?
He'd made Midnight Express beforehand.
Oh, okay.
And then The Mission and The Killing Fields and
oh, wow. Okay.
Afterwards. Oh, and Local Hero. He made Local Hero right around the same time as this.
Okay.
He's good at what he does. I wish to take nothing away from him, but he was the one who was out front and center with this. And he's the one who tells the story about doing the awards tours in the spring of 1982 in Los Angeles and having everyone come up to him. This is in his book, and it's a lovely anecdote. Everyone would come up to him and say, I'm voting for your movie, but it doesn't have a chance.
Oh,
and it won.
really?
Yeah, it was the way he tells it. It was the consensus favorite, but no one would admit it to each other.
Yeah,
The
sure.
same way Coda won this year, I think, just out of attrition. That all the other films burned out so fast, and this little picture that Apple just never stopped marketing.
Came up the middle. Yeah,
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 sailed right through.
yeah.
And you can see, I mean, it feels like a prestigious film. It feels important, but it doesn't fall victim to the self-seriousness of it. I mean, there's a heaviness to the material, but the actors just play it so naturally, so easily. I have to say, I did not know that they found Ben Cross in the cast of Chicago,
That's right. Yeah,
which
that's
I
right.
discovered. I did my own wiki run, and that was like, really?
Yeah,
Because I
yeah,
can't picture it. I mean, I guess I obviously it happened, but he is so his affect is so serious and composed that
yeah.
I couldn't see him playing Billy Flynn, who is a much looser, sillier character.
Yeah,
But
I found that odd too, and yeah, I have it right. Ian Charleston was or Charleston, but however it's pronounced, was doing a production of Piaf at the Royal Shakespeare Company when they just happened to go see the play, and he said that's the guy. So again, a credit to the director because these were actors that came off beautifully in film scenes that weren't, they had Gielgud and those other guys, but these were newbies to the film world, and, and,
mhm,
and pulled off a real naturalism and heart that's not easy to do. Um,
yeah, and the balance between older and younger lends itself to the mentorship stuff in sports, but also to the hand holding that it takes for the film to introduce these relative unknowns
mhm.
to the audience, especially in England. I mean, in America, I don't think anybody knew who anybody was.
Yeah, but I'm gonna have to go watch it again now, but
Yeah, I think this is great. So when was the last time you watched it all the way through? Was it only the one viewing?
it has to be. I'm sure I rewatched it on DVD some 20 years ago or something, but it certainly has been 20 years. And as I say, periodically I'll go if I'm YouTubing around, I'll find either that running scene or the there's a beautiful scene with Ian Holm when the flag comes up the pole, when because he's banned from the stadium, and yeah, I don't know. They're just all they're spine tingly moments. They're it's all pure inspiration, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the sports thing, obviously, but it's also the pride, the idea that any sports film is built on triumph or loss,
Mhm.
which is so clear and easy to understand, even if it's not a culture that, like an American audience watching this, they wouldn't be necessarily familiar with. Like Warner actually cut the cricket scene that opens the film for the North
Yes,
American release, which was a
right,
big deal
right.
at the time.
And why? For a rating thing or something? Or
I think they just assumed that no one would care.
yeah, sure, sure.
That it's a foreign sport, and that this was at a point in time where I guess you'd need a speech by someone to explain what cricket is and how it works to sell it in the audience. And maybe it was the right move too, because it does get into the story a little bit faster.
Yeah, yeah.
Although having seen it since in restorations, it's nice. It's fine.
I
It
don't think
doesn't
I know. I read that, but in my head, I'm like, I don't remember a cricket scene, so maybe I've only seen the one that they with it edited out. I think.
quite possibly. I think it was restored for one of the Blu-rays,
Yeah.
but it's perfectly innocuous. It does take a little longer to get the movie started, and it would have been a bit alienating, I guess, to an American audience. But I can't imagine, if you're going to see a movie called Chariots of Fire and with that poster and that trailer, I can't imagine it being enough of a deal breaker that people just get up and leave.
No, I don't. I did also read that Cambridge, they refused to have them film those Cambridge scenes at Cambridge. I think because they were
Really?
afraid of because of the anti-Semitism in the script, they didn't want it linked to Cambridge University, so they filmed those at Eton College, I think. But I think later, Cambridge was quite sad that they didn't have a link to that film for sure.
Yeah, there's so much flying around. There's the intersection of Harold's romance with Sybil Gordon, who was in Gilbert and Sullivan's troupe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you get
And
the sense that
so there's another alignment. This is weird. So they were performing the Mikado in that,
yeah,
and I think it was 81 or 82 that Stratford did quite a famous Mikado that was brought back again and again and again. So my worlds must have been colliding in those years. Yeah. Yeah.
was it ever on tour? Did that show tour? Because
Yeah, it probably did. It was a very, very famous. Stratford brought it back 3, 4 times. It was it broke all sorts of records, and it always seemed to be on. But I'm pretty sure it was 80, 81. I'll have to.
Yeah, I saw that production. I just don't remember where.
Yeah, I think they brought it to Toronto, maybe the Royal Alex or something.
Yeah, I want to say the O'Keefe Center, but that might have been where I saw the Music Man.
Yeah.
My mom dragged me to, well, not dragged me. I didn't
There you
hate
go.
them.
Stratford Festival in 1982. There you go. Isn't that weird?
And were you weren't in that one?
I wasn't in it, no, but I remember, at the time I wasn't even planning to be an actor. I sang in a choir here in Stratford, and they needed young boys who could sing. So that was my route into Stratford, into the festival and the Shakespeare's. But of course I remember seeing it, and it was a huge inspiration for me, for sure.
So how did it work with you? When did you actually choose to be an actor? When did you commit?
Well, I did those 2 years as a kid, and I remember I never ever wanted to be an actor. When you see the underbelly of, in those days it was still everyone smoking backstage, and there was great misery and angst, and all sorts of, you saw the dark side of theater as a kid. So I thought, well, I never want to do this, and I went off to school and studied politics, and then I was registered for law school, and I came back to Toronto, and I worked at the legislature for a year. I joke that that's kind of where I got the bug for acting, is watching them operate in the legislature. But I remember I said, well, I'll defer my law school acceptance and give it a year, because I loved theater, but I never wanted to make a living at it. And it was the next year I was brought up to Stratford. I did a couple non-professional productions in Toronto, and then some directors from Stratford came to see it and brought me up, and there it is. And I would often run into the person, I can't remember what professor it was at Osgood, who kept deferring my LSATs because they were Stratford patrons. But finally I just gave it up and said, I've got the acting bug, and here I am. Yeah. But I don't know. I probably would have enjoyed law too. There's many times when I'm out of work as an actor, I'm like, dang it, I should have been a lawyer. But anyway. Yeah.
So many people have that story, the double life, right? Like this slow discovery that this is the thing you need to do.
Yeah. And law and theater for some reason are always aligned. There's often lawyers who lament they weren't actors, and actors who lament they weren't lawyers. I don't know what that link is, but it's there for sure.
Oh, I think it's the passion for speaking and being heard.
Sure.
And I think that's always struck me as the overlap where.
Well, that's interesting. My father was a judge. I mean, he was a lawyer first and then a judge, and he and I would often chat about that because he loved theater. He probably should have been an actor, but he did okay in the law world. But he would talk about that, about giving a charge to the jury or something, and that sort of public speaking idea as a judge. So they're both sort of theaters of sorts, I suppose.
I know people who run improv classes, and they say every now and then the lawyers will show up to take one or two to learn how to be faster on their feet, and they can always spot them because the poise is different. The energy is wrong for theater. You have to be open instead of prepared.
Yeah, sure.
Or you have to be prepared enough to be unprepared, I think is how they put it.
Oh, it's interesting. So the lawyers want to take him. Okay. I guess to be able to move on the fly or something like that. I guess.
Yeah, I suppose it is. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, sure it does. And I think you have to, there's a bit of off the cuff, certainly when you're giving summations or something where you need to convince a jury. But yeah.
Yeah, you said the other film that you would have been willing to talk about was E.T. Anna Hopkins did that on the show. And I'm very, very curious to know what the connection is other than temporal. Were these just two films that hit you at the right time in your development?
I think so. E.T., it was the first experience I had. I remember I came home, for some reason I was sleeping on a mattress at my grandmother's or something. I don't know, my mom must have been away or something, and I couldn't stop crying. Like it was the first time in my life a piece of art hit me, really hard. Like I was really devastated by the whole thing. And of course I did rewatch that one recently with my daughter, and she was beside herself too. And so it's an odd one, I know, but I guess they're both films that at a time in my life affected me, and so when I thought about what film I'm going to talk about, I'm like, well, it has to be something that really I feel kind of changed my life. Braveheart is in there too, I think, and a few others. But E.T. was a special one because I think it was that first time I just had my heart broken by a film, let alone any piece of art, I think.
Yeah, I love it. It holds up. It's just it's just pure narrative. And the thing that was boggling my mind, well, not even that, but the thing that I was struggling with was I can absolutely see why you as an actor would be drawn to Chariots of Fire, even if you didn't know you were going to be an actor. Like it has that language, it has that performance. It's about being the best version of yourself. It's all the things that acting feeds into. E.T. is, I mean, there's almost no dialogue. It's all gesture and connection. And it is like, it's a masterclass in acting because you're dealing with an inanimate object that's your co-star. And
Sure,
Henry Thomas is remarkable, but it does seem so counter to the energy of Chariots of Fire. Although they are both, they build towards this incredible rush of emotion at the climax, they're otherwise so different. I'm just fascinated by it. And
I think also it's a little known fact. Although if you go onto YouTube, and this is my party trick, is if you Google Keanu Reeves teddy bears. I was interviewed when I was 13 years old by Keanu Reeves, pre Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, about my teddy bear collection. And apparently this clip made it all the way to the Tonight Show because Keanu was on there as a guest and they had found this clip of him going to the teddy bear convention. But I had a teddy bear collection. So I loved these sort of inanimate object things that I saw life in, another, I guess, early thing of being an actor, I suppose I could imbue things with life. So I suppose the E.T. thing's a little bit of that too. I mean, he's just this odd creature, and it does hold up. The story holds up. I mean, you wonder if you remade it, whether they'd remake that creature and make him so much better, because at times he does just look like a little puppet. But the kid is amazing, and I still love watching his audition, which I'm sure you've seen for that part. I mean, it's a
story breaks my heart.
It's amazing. Yeah. But it's I guess both those films, they're moving films. They're weepy films at a time, and that's my Irish blood, I guess. And they're human. They're simply and beautifully acted, I think. And so that's I guess that's why I picked them both. But isn't that funny? I thought, the two things that came to mind were films from my childhood rather than anything as an adult. And although I was going to say Withnail and I as well, but I didn't know how many of your listeners would know that one. But as a grown-up actor, that I have seen that about 17,000 times. But,
yeah, there is a film about the love of performance.
Yeah, or the hate of performance. And I did run into him at a film festival.
Grant? Richard E. Grant, or
Richard E. Grant, yeah. And I went up to talk to him, and I'm usually good with famous people, and I just turned to jelly. I couldn't remember because as I got close to him, like I'm staring in the eyes of Withnail here, and I couldn't even remember my own name.
Yeah, that is a remarkable moment too for Grant, just because they messed him up and dirtied him a little bit, and somehow he has aged into that version of himself. Like he's not messy now, but Withnail is older than Grant. Like he's worn down by the alcohol abuse and everything else. And Richard E. Grant has somehow aged into that to a point now where it's funny, yeah. He has this glee in his eyes. It's still very youthful.
Well, he does. And I don't know if you followed him through the pandemic, because he would do little quotes from Withnail every day to get people through. And I was loving it. But yeah, he's Withnail for sure. Always.
Yeah. So this is the harder question because I cannot see how, but is there anything from Chariots of Fire that you've used in your own work or borrowed or outright stolen for something?
I don't know about stolen or borrowed. As I say, when I played sports, I had on a little cassette tape that little speech. Behold, the nations are as a drop in the bucket, and our country's a small dust in the balance. All things before him are as nothing, and they've come to do him less than nothing in vanity. He bringeth the princes to nothing. He maketh the judges of the earth. I have it off book, and so that's from, and I haven't seen the film in 20 years. So that's how much I listened to that speech. And I would just say I think my love of Shakespeare, which has come about, that was just an early, my mom said I was an odd child. I used to memorize Shakespeare as a kid too, because I just love the poetry. I love the music of it. And so I would say that sense of that theatricality or something to that is certainly something I've kept in my heart for all these years. As I say, I was shooting a film in the pandemic, and I was playing a sort of churchman. So I was in the basement of this church, and there framed on the wall was that quote from the Bible, wherever it's from. And so I just thought that was an odd about face. But so I still recite that one for inspiration. And as I say, I'm not overly religious. I just find it poetic. So I would say that. And one day I hope, because there was a theater production made of this, I think. I don't know where it went on, but somebody did a theatrical adaptation of that film. So maybe I'll get to act in it one day, but I'm going to have to play Gielgud's role or something. I'm getting too old.
How would you even stage it?
I don't know. I mean, it might get a bit foolish. I mean, it'd be the slow-mo run.
I can think of all the bad ways. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and you're drawing a very thin line between comedy and drama there, I think, when you're doing slow-mo running. But
I wonder if you could just do it without the running at all. Just leave the event out and just have it be about the locker room.
I bet you could. I mean, Shakespeare did it. He a lot of his plays, he kept the battles off stage because they couldn't do it. It's too expensive. So there's probably a way to do that, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And if the stage adaptation isn't that, maybe you should do this anyway.
Yeah, I would love to adapt it. Sure. Yeah.
My thanks to Graham Abbey, who's prepping 2 shows with his festival players right now in Prince Edward County, the Flight Festival of Contemporary Dance, which starts Tuesday, August 9th, and Kristen De Silva's new romantic comedy Beyond the Sea, which opens August 24th. Details for both shows are online at festivalplayers.ca. Thanks also to Jen Paris. She knows what she did. You can find Graham on Twitter at Grabby, Grabbey, and you can find Chariots of Fire on Blu-ray and DVD from Warner Home Entertainment and streaming in the US on Showtime. It's also available to rent or buy on most VOD platforms in North America. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the podcast is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 46 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next time.